what do we know about how Elizabeth found out about her mother's fall and also what she came to think about it? Because it obviously happened when she was far too young. But what evidence do we have for how she felt about it in later years?
It's such a good question, and one that we don't fully know the answer to, in so much that we don't know how and when Elizabeth found out the truth about her mother. We do know that she was at Hunsdon in Hertfordshire at the time of Anne's execution, and that so too was Mary, and that Lady Kingston, who had been with Anne in her final days at the Tower, she's the wife of the constable of the Tower, that Lady Kingston is sent to Hunsdon to tell Mary about Anne's execution. There's no evidence that Elizabeth was told at that time, and I'd suggest that she probably wasn't told at that time. So we don't know how that comes about, but we do know that there are signs that Elizabeth resonated with her mother and did her best to try and remember her later in her life. And we see this so much as the relationships that Elizabeth shared with members of her mother's family, for example. So particularly Henry and Catherine Carey, who were the children of Anne Boleyn's sister, Mary Boleyn. We know that Elizabeth has very, very strong and close relationships with those two children, and that those definitely start at some point in her youth and are maintained for the rest of her life. And certainly, I mean, there's a reference, for example, to a member of the Boleyn family in Elizabeth's accounts when she's about 16, 17 years old as well. So it is clear that there's some kind of contact there. And there is also the suggestion that her mother's likeness is contained in a ring, the famous Chequers ring, which contains a miniature of Elizabeth and one of another woman who, it is argued, and I would probably agree with this, is Anne Boleyn, and that this was a sign that Elizabeth was keen to keep her mother close to her and eager to remember her. So I think that there are signs that Elizabeth was very interested in her mother and was keen to remember her in her own way, but quite how far this went, you know, she never spoke about her openly as such. And again, it's been argued that Elizabeth never had her mother's remains moved from the Tower and reburied elsewhere in Westminster Abbey, for example. I would say actually that's quite a political move on Elizabeth's part, and she judged that it was probably best to let sleeping dogs lie. I don't think we can actually infer anything about the relationship from that. So to all intents and purposes, I think there's definitely signs that she felt sympathetic towards her mother.
It's this interesting tension in this history, isn't it? Because there's so much personal drama and tragedy and evil behaviour in this history. It's so tempting to read it purely as psychodrama and to forget the politics. You know, as you mentioned, her decision as to where her mother's remains are interned is not just a personal question, it's a highly political question. And you obviously have written 5 books now about the Tudors. I share the same interest in the Tudors that practically everyone does, I think. I suspect that part of the reason the Tudors are so fascinating is because of all this psychodrama stuff, because of all the I was going to ask about Elizabeth's physical similarity with Anne Boleyn, because what Anne Boleyn looked like is this endless source of fascination for fans of Tudor history, because she was clearly incredibly sexy. She can't not have been. But we don't exactly know, there are different accounts, right? Talk to me about this, because this question of what she looked like is so fascinating. Was she good looking?
Yeah, most sources suggest that she wasn't good looking by contemporary standards, in terms of the fact that contemporaries admired very pale skin, whereas Anne was considered to be swarthy and olive skinned, that she had various moles which weren't considered to be particularly attractive as well. But she did have very dark and piercing eyes, and she did exude this sex appeal and this charm and this charisma. And I think that it is that made her really attractive and beautiful to her admirers and to Henry in particular, because yes, all other sources seem to agree that while she was striking in looks, certainly she's not considered to be beautiful as such. And, you know, Anne's enemies as well talk about the fact that, I mean, obviously they've got a bias and opinion, but talk about the fact that, yes, you know, she's got a large mouth, and, you know, talk about her breasts and all these sorts of things. And I think that they've most clearly got an agenda. But yes, there is most definitely something about Anne, and it's definitely that sense of real charm, and also I think confidence in herself, the huge self-confidence that she exudes, and the style and sophistication. That's something that's seen as hugely attractive and extremely sexy to Henry VIII.
And Elizabeth was fair-skinned though, wasn't she? And she had the Tudor red hair. So in that sense, she didn't look like her mother?
No, that's right. So she did very typically have many Tudor characteristics, including, as you say, the red hair, also the famous temper. But she did have her mother's eyes, most contemporaries agree. And, you know, she also has, if you look at the portraits, although we don't really have anything, or not very much, that's contemporary for Anne, but certainly they appear to have had a similar shaped face. And there were, again, characteristics that Elizabeth was believed to have in common with her mother. And it's something that later on her sister Mary comments on, the fact that Elizabeth is thought to have characteristics that resemble her mother, and she doesn't mean it in a complimentary sense.